Assalamu alaikum. This is teacher Fatima Salim explaining the lesson Mendel and His Peas. Today's objective is to talk about the relationship between what we call traits أو الصفات الوراثية heredity اللي هي عملية الوراثة نفسها. احنا بدنا نفرق بين الوراثة والصفات الوراثية. Second of all, we're going to talk about the scientist Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics. Then we're going to explain the difference between dominant and recessive traits. ورح نشوف كمان شوي what all of this means. When we look at this picture, you see 3 generations of women in the same family. As you can see, they are similar in appearance. This is because of what we call heredity. Heredity means the passing of traits from parents to offspring. So, for example, the eye color is a trait. This trait can move from one generation to the other. So, I may take my eye color from my father or even from my grandfather or grandmother. The first scientist who studied this was Gregor Mendel. He worked in a monastery. Monastery اللي هي دير. Okay? تابع لكنيسة. He loved to plant different plants and study what happens when you plant different plants or when you grow different plants. He noticed that some traits اللي هي الصفات appear in a parent generation and suddenly disappear in the second generation, then appear again. He was really interested in knowing how that happens. So this is why he started studying pea plants. He chose pea plants for many reasons. The first reason is that pea plants grow quickly. By this, Mendel was able to study so many generations of peas in his lifetime, which gives us better results. The second reason he chose peas was that the traits of peas are simple, meaning that for every characteristic of peas, we have only 2 forms. So, for example, peas are either yellow or green. Yellow or green. Have you ever seen purple peas or red peas? No. The seeds of peas are either yellow or green. So things are simple in peas, which means it's the best choice to begin studying heredity, because when we begin studying a new science, we have to begin with simple things. We never begin with the most complicated things. So it's wrong to begin studying heredity in humans unless we study heredity in peas and simple living things first. The flowers of peas, for example, are either purple or white. Peas are either tall or short. There are no medium-sized peas. They're either really tall or really short, which makes things simple and makes studying simple. The third reason he chose peas was they can self-pollinate. By pollinate, I mean carry pollen from place to place. To know what this means, take a look at this diagram. Here I have a pea flower. In a pea flower, we have both male parts and female part. The female part is the big green thing you can see in the middle of the diagram. And the red parts around it are the male parts. Since the flower had both male and female parts, so the pollen, حبوب اللقاح, can move from the male parts to the female parts in the same flower. So peas can self-pollinate. It means the same flower can give pollen from the male to the female part so that pollination can happen. Now, the second type of pollination is cross-pollination. And by this, I mean that the pollen can move from one flower to another flower. Of course, this needs help to happen. And this help is provided by insects such as bees or simply the air. Okay? So this is how cross-pollination happens. What I'm talking about here is that peas can either self-pollinate, pollen moving from male part to the female part in the same plant, or they can even cross-pollinate, where pollen can move from a flower to another. This means that pea plants have many choices, so they can give me many experiments to make in heredity, and we will see that in action in a while. Now there's a very important concept here, which is the characteristic. By characteristic, I mean the general description of a living thing. For example, the seed color or the pea color is simply a characteristic. But how many pea colors do I have in peas? Only 2. Each one of these 2 forms of a characteristic is called a trait. So, trait is yellow or green. So how many traits do we have in peas? We have only 2 traits, but the characteristic is 1. That's pea color. So the pea color is the characteristic, but green color and yellow color are traits. Same goes for flower color. Flower color is a characteristic and it has 2 forms or 2 traits, which are purple and white. The last characteristic we have in this table is height. Height is a general description, so it's a characteristic. How many forms of height do I have in peas? Only 2 forms, tall or short. So the characteristic is height and the traits are tall or short. Now what did Mendel do? Mendel wanted to know what would happen if I cross purple flowers with white flowers in peas. So he was really anxious to know that. He wanted to know what would happen if I cross-pollinate purple with white. إذا مندل كان بده يعرف إيش رح يصير هون. So he brought a purple flower and he cut off the male parts. When you cut off the male parts of a flower, it becomes female, okay? That's it. Now what did he do to the other white flower? He left it as it is. So he cut off the male parts of the purple flower and he let the white flower whole with male and female parts. Now the male parts from the white flower will simply travel to the purple flower because the purple flower has no male parts. So it has to take male cells or pollen from another flower, which is the white flower. And this is what Mendel did. He cross-pollinated what we call the parent generation. هذا اسمه الجيل الأول اللي هو أبيض مع بنفسجي. When you cross white with purple and you wait for the new generation, which is called the first generation, سماه مندل الجيل الأول, النتيجة الأولى. All of the flowers were actually purple. إذا نتيجة شغل مندل كان الجيل الأول 100% بنفسجي. So where did the white trait go? Did it disappear? What could hide it? إيش اللي خباه بالضبط؟ اللون الثاني. إذا اللون البنفسجي, the purple color is stronger than the white color. This is why the white color disappeared. Now, did it really disappear or did it just hide? So, to answer that, Mendel let these purple flowers from the first generation self-pollinate. And when he did that, he had the second generation. In the second generation, 75% of the flowers were purple and only 25% were white. إذن اللون الأبيض رجع طلع بس بنسبة قليلة 25% بالضبط. So 75% purple, only 25% white. So the white trait was not gone, it was just hidden. It was just masked. And who hid it? Who masked it? Who covered it? The stronger trait اللي هي اللون البنفسجي. انت هلا يمكن حذرتي ان اللون البنفسجي هو الصفة السائدة the dominant trait واللون الأبيض هو الصفة المتنحية the recessive trait. So the trait that covers another trait is dominant السائد. But the trait which is covered or hidden by another trait is recessive المتنحية. فهون الأبيض متنحي البنفسجي سائد. This is what Mendel concluded. The dominant trait is the trait that covers another trait. Recessive trait is a trait that hides in the first generation but reappears in the second generation. We call it recessive. Now, Mendel did this in so many, let me go back to that slide. In so many characteristics, he repeated the same experiment. ومن هيك طلع بأنه يكتشف إيش السائد وإيش المتنحي. So, purple, yellow, green are all what? Dominant traits. But the bottom traits, white flowers, green seeds, yellow pods, and short pea plants are all recessive. كيف استنتج? From the experiment that we have just discussed here. That purple with white gave us 100% purple. When you let them pollinate one more time, they will give us 75% purple, dominant, and 25% white, recessive. Mendel made the conclusion that there is a set of instruction for each characteristic, and each comes from one parent. It means that for every single trait, I have a piece of instruction from my father and a piece of instruction from my mother. Now together they work and they give me the trait that I have. And these pieces of instruction are what we now call genes. But Mendel did not call them genes, okay? He called them instructions. And that's it. Now, Mendel's work was not really appreciated until 30 years later. 30 years after his death. But now everyone recognizes his work. Thank you.